So I think we have everybody here to start the meeting. So I'm going to call this special meeting of the New York State Cemetery Board to order. I am Mark Pattison, representing Secretary of State Rossano, representing the Attorney General. Yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Jill Faber, representing Attorney General Letitia James.
And Department of Health.
I'm sorry, I think I was muted.
Yep. So
this is Tom Fuller, representing Dr. Howard's department.
Great. That is the makes up the completion of the board. A couple housekeeping things. Again, this is a special meeting for the purposes of one agenda to introduce some emergency regulations. People should mute their lines when they're not speaking so that we can have a good conversation if you can. We are required to take attendance for those who are here aside from the staff. And I do want to say that we're also joined by Tony Malillo, counsel to the board, and Louis Polishuk, director of the Division of Board of Cemeteries, and other staff. Do see some other people there. Can people introduce themselves? And you're just going to have to sort of jump in, introduce yourself, and Alicia, can you perhaps try to keep track of who we have here else attending?
Yes, I will.
So just people jump in.
Philip Tassi, president of NISAC and vice president at Ferncliff Cemetery.
Thank you.
This is John Caulfield from Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Rochester.
Thank you.
David Fleming.
This is Dolores Stigler.
Cemeteries.
I got Dolores and I got Dave. Hello, Dave.
Dolores Stigler from Whitechapel Cemetery in Amherst, New York.
Thank you.
Gordon Zuckerman from Vale Cemetery in Schenectady, New York.
Thank you. If there are no others, I'll continue on. This meeting we will give anybody a chance to speak after. Well, we'll give people a chance to speak. Period. One of the emergency legislation that or regulations that we're putting in. As you know, we've been dealing with significant impact from COVID-19 in terms of crematories, and we've made a number of changes trying to facilitate the process. Louis, why don't you describe the circumstances that we're in that bring us to this point?
Okay, so just summarizing from the top, throughout the public health emergency, the Division of Cemeteries has been working with crematories across the state to understand caseload and capacity and help them adapt to the issues and variables that inevitably arise in any emergency. So in late March, we issued guidance allowing for remote signing and witnessing of the cremation authorization form under certain circumstances. Around the same time, we began asking crematories to report daily on various aspects of cremation capacity and their needs. Using this data, we have already identified crematories outside of the downstate area that have spare capacity for cremations and have shared this information with stakeholders. Several funeral directors have used this information to arrange for cremations in other regions of the state. To further facilitate the process, yesterday, the division revised its cremation authorization form to allow the person authorizing the cremation to permit the funeral director to choose a different crematory if necessary. However, remains await cremation at the busiest remains await cremation at the biggest crematories in New York State, meaning that there are remains that are intended to be cremated there. For the most part, the remains are not actually at the crematory. In order to expedite cremation of these remains and delivery of cremated remains to families, we need to permit remains to be sent to a different crematory that was first authorized without requiring that a family member execute a complete new authorization form, which could unnecessarily add to the family's grief. The proposed rule changes that council will discuss will allow funeral directors to use another crematory when necessary, even though the existing signed authorization does not contain language permitting use of crematory other than the one specified in the form, so long as the current emergency conditions still exist. In any event, the funeral director would still, under the proposal, be required to obtain the consent of the person who signed the authorization form in the first place. So that's where we're at and what we're up to.
Please mute your phone if you're not speaking. Thank you. Tony, we're sort of flying by the seat of our pants here a little bit. Tony, whoever has a train set in the background, you can mute your phone. Thank you. Tony, would you, I think there might be two steps to this, but would you describe what we're doing, introduce the proposed regulatory change?
Sorry, I was on mute. Mark, could you say that last part again? I missed it.
I just want you to describe the regulatory change. I think it might be in two steps. Is there something we're filing in terms of notice of necessity, or it just the regulatory change that we're going to vote on and discuss?
Actually, I do want to backtrack just a bit, just to let everybody know the procedures we're following. As Mark said when the meeting opened, this is a special meeting called by the chair. The board members received appropriate notice and are in attendance, and we've complied with the requirements of the open meetings law when a meeting is called in less than 3 days for notice and posting. And we are proceeding under Executive Order 202.1, which amended the Public Office Law to allow us to meet by video conference or teleconference and to have folks call in or attend by video without there being a location where the meeting is being located. So all of that has been complied with and proceeding under those procedures. So we have posted draft regulations for the board to consider. I'll first do is I'll read it. It's fortunately a very short text. Lewis indicated this deals with the cremation authorization, and the requirements for the cremation authorization form are set forth in section 202.13 of our regulation. This adds a section 203.14. It's proposed to be entitled Emergency Cases. The text that's been proposed is the governor has declared a disaster emergency pursuant to section 28 of the executive law, or the cemetery board determines that emergency conditions exist, substantially delay timely cremation of human remains, then notwithstanding the 2.13C of this part, the crematory may accept human remains delivered with a cremation authorization form in which the intended crematory has been manually corrected by a funeral director or person authorized to deliver remains on behalf of a funeral director, provided that the crematory is able to verify the intended final disposition for such human remains, provided the person in controlled disposition has been made aware of and has consented to the transfer. That's the proposed language that is before the board and now before the public to be discussed. And we also have proposed a finding of necessity. We propose doing this filing by emergency filing. And to do an emergency filing, you do need a finding of necessity. And so we propose that the board finds as follows. That The board finds and determines that adopting this rule on an emergency basis is necessary for the preservation of the public health, safety, and general welfare, compliance with the requirements of Subdivision 1 of Section 202 of the State Administrative Procedures Act with contrary to public interest for the following reasons. And just to clarify, before I go into the reasons that are listed, Section 202 has certain formalities that are normally followed for a normal filing of a proposed rule change. There's initial notice, public comment, response to the public comment, and also prior review before it's posted for public comment. So under these emergency procedures, all of that is dispensed with, almost all of it. There will be a filing. There'll be forms filed. If it's approved today, it'll be hopefully filed tonight before the midnight. And if it's filed tonight, it'll be effective today. So let me go into the reasons for emergency basis and the findings of necessity that we propose. The first is, on March 7, 2020, Governor Andrew M. Cuomo declared a state disaster emergency for the entire state of New York relating to the novel coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak. All necessary state agencies to take appropriate action to assist individuals containing, preparing for, responding to, and recovering from this emergency, like state and local property, and to provide such other assistance as is necessary to protect. The next numbered item, number 2, Not-for-Profit Corporation Law Article 15 mandates that a next of kin or authorizing agent authorize cremation by a signed authorization form attesting to the permission for the cremation of the deceased. It prohibits cremation from cremating without the form. Number 3, the 19 NYCRR Section 203.3C requires that the cremation authorization form set forth the name and address of the crematory and provide explicit authorization for the crematory to cremate the remains of the deceased. It requires the signature of the person in control of disposition attesting to the accuracy and completeness of the information in the cremation authorization form, and requires the signature of the funeral director as a witness to its execution. Number 4, in the proposed findings, as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak, the downstate region has experienced a tremendous surge in deaths and a need for cremation that exceeds the capacity of downstate crematories, resulting in substantial delays in cremation and creating significant issues with storage of remains. Number 5, in the proposed, hold on a second. I'm about to lose my battery. There we go. Okay. Number 5, crematories outside of downstate are available to cremate remains promptly, but the requirements relating to the cremation authorization form delay or impede sending remains to a crematory other than the one named in the form that was signed by the person in control of disposition. Now we're getting to the heart of it. Number 6, to address these issues, procedures must be in place that would allow crematories to accept human remains delivered with a cremation authorization form in which the intended crematory has been manually corrected by a funeral director, a person authorized to deliver remains on behalf of a funeral director. In order to protect the interests of the family of the deceased, the procedures should require that the crematory is able to verify the intended final disposition for such human remains. That's number 7. Number 8, Not-for-Profit Corporation Law, Section 1504C1 gives the cemetery board the power and duty to adopt such reasonable rules and regulations as the cemetery board shall deem necessary for the proper administration of Article 15. Under this proposed rule, due to the Governor's March 7, 2020 emergency order, these emergency procedures will be effective immediately upon filing of this emergency rulemaking. And this is number 10. In the future, these procedures will be effective upon a declaration by the governor of a disaster emergency pursuant to Section 28 of the executive law, or 2, a determination by the cemetery board that the emergency conditions exist that substantially delay timely cremation of human remains. And that's it. So that's what we propose as the basis for the finding of necessity, which would allow for this to go through the emergency procedures rather than the normal, more time-consuming procedures. So at this point, I think I'll pause and let Mark open things up to the rest of the board.
Tony, we need to vote on this first.
Well, this is our first chance to hear from the board, to hear their views on the text. So, yeah, there certainly will be a vote. And if you want to call the question before we open the comments.
That's what I'll do. I'll make a motion for purposes of putting the finding of message of necessity on the table for discussion. If I have a second, then we'll move to discussion.
Second.
Yeah, I will second that, or I will vote yea.
Okay, we got a second. Now, let me just sort of first say, Tom, do you have any questions in this regard?
No, I don't. Louis and I have discussed this at length, and I'm very familiar with it, and I understand the necessity of this.
Okay, Jill, do you have something that you'd like to ask?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right. I mean, I would say I'll open this up to any comments by the public that would inform this issue. And it's the only way we can do it is if people want to jump in, they can jump in, but I can't.
Question on the authorization form, but what about the cremation permit? Does the permit have to be changed to the crematory name, or do we accept an authorization form that allows for the change in the crematory?
Let me just,
I'll take a crack at answering that. We're waiting for,
would you wait a second? Because the first issue before us is the finding of necessity. And then I think his question is more pertinent to the regulation.
fair enough.
Any questions of the public or comments of the public about the finding of necessity?
Yes,
Dave?
David Fleming from the New York State Association of Cemeteries. We've been working with individually with members of the board as well as the division for 5 weeks now, almost 7 days a week. And it's incredibly clear that this is of absolute necessity that the board move forward for emergency adoption. And we thank you for calling a special meeting in order to address this issue.
Thank you, David. Any other public comments on the issue of finding of necessity? There being none, I think we can call the question. Jill, how do you vote?
Yes, I vote in favor.
Tom?
I vote in favor.
I vote in favor as well. All in favor, aye. The board votes unanimously on the finding of necessity. Tony, would you like to introduce the regulation? Tony? I can't.
So I keep forgetting that I'm on mute. So I actually had read the text before reading the text of the proposed rule before reading the finding of necessity. Essentially, instead of rereading it, I'll summarize. It allows a crematory that's receiving remains to receive an authorization form where the named crematory has been modified by the funeral director, or somebody who's authorized to act on behalf of the funeral director. Just to clarify that part, there's an executive order out that has allowed the Commissioner of Health, I believe, or actually funeral directors, you can clarify any mistake I make in describing this. Well, our funeral directors deputize other funeral persons to act on their behalf. So this language, since they might be the ones modifying the form, is there to cover that possibility. And so this would allow, as Louis has indicated, the tremendous backlog of bodies downstate, there's the upstate, the central New York, et cetera. And this will allow bodies, patient forms that have already been executed, to go to a different crematory. And the person making the change does need the consent of the person who signed the authorization form. And it's up to the crematory to make sure that, yes, cremation is intended for these remains that it is receiving. So that's the crux of the text.
So would you like to take a crack at answering the question that was asked?
so that question is one that we have discussed. We are the keepers of the authorization form. We created it, our regulations govern it, and so that's for us to change. The requirement of delivering a burial transit cremation permit comes out of the public health law. That's not an us thing, that's a vital records thing or a vital statistics thing in New York City. That said, we've had discussions with council to the vital records, and they are considering the issue. And we had asked for them to give us some form of guidance on that. We're still waiting on that. I'll note one more thing quickly that at least one of the funeral directors, and probably all of the ones, as far as I know, who've been removing remains from downstate and bringing them elsewhere, have been able to amend the permits to do that. The difference between the authorization and the permits is that you don't need to go back to the family. You just go into a computer and type in an update, whether it's EVRS or EDRS, and eVital or EDRS for the state, eVital for the city. So it's a little bit of a different process. You're still muted, Mark.
You saw my lips moving. I am going to put this proposed regulation, make a motion to put this proposed emergency regulation on the table for purposes of discussion first. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so let's have a discussion. Tom, do you have any questions or concerns you'd like to raise in terms of this emergency regulation?
No, I do not.
Jill, do you have anything you'd like to raise? I don't hear Jill.
Sorry, I was muted. No, I don't have anything I'd like to raise. Thank you.
So I'll also then again ask if any members of the public would like to raise some concerns or ask some questions that would inform the board's vote on this emergency regulation.
Mr. Chairman, it's Dave Fleming again from New York State Association of Cemeteries. So just so we're clear, this really is not going to deal with the bodies that are in backlog unless the funeral directors are proactively making changes to those, to the transfer permits, correct? Or if someone else can.
That's precisely what we're waiting on vital records / vital statistics to clarify.
So we can't start shipping, or they couldn't start making changes right now and start shipping bodies right now.
The day isn't over yet. We may still hear from counsel for vital records.
Fair enough.
And the answer is no, they can, because at least for the state system, there's really no impediment for them correcting the permits. They can do that electronically. So they can go ahead and do that. In the city system, there's the added wrinkle that you have to pay $40 to make such a correction.
Right.
But I think they can. This enables field directors to, they do have to get consent, but they can get consent and then we can start to process the bodies effectively immediately, right, Louis?
I couldn't find, right. I mean, the biggest hangup is the authorization. The rest of this stuff should be easily doable and in fact has been done already in people bringing remains upstate. If the question is, if I had to answer you right now, do they have to have a correct permit when they show up at the crematory? Not having heard from the Department of Health and not having heard from my own attorney who's on the phone and can comment on this as well, I think you probably do. But that corrected permit is a very simple thing to get compared to getting a whole new authorization.
And again, it's outside the purview of this board, so that's something else for them to work on.
Right. Although, like I said, hopefully we'll get some clarification on that really soon.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the information.
Are there any other?
I just have one question. Just wanted to ask Louis something about what he just said. So you indicated that with regard to deceased who had been brought upstate, this hadn't been um, a problem in terms of time and effort from what you knew, that wouldn't prevent this from being facilitated for this rule, correct?
I have not heard anything to contradict what you just said.
Okay.
Mark, if I could also clarify. So,
Please.
yeah, what Department of Health has said is that they will guide those folks that they oversee, which is the funeral directors. Once they've issued a guidance, they've made us aware of that, then we will make our folks, the crematory operators, aware of the guidance that Department of Health has issued to their folks. Everybody will be on the same. You know, we can't tell funeral directors what to do with the cremation permit, but we can tell our folks what it can look like when they receive it and accept it. So we're working hand in hand with Department of Health.
Thank you, Tony. Any other questions or comments?
The only other point I want to make on your motion, Mark, just to clarify, you know, normally at this stage of making a bill, we would be proposing, but in this case, the motion should be to adopt the rule and have it filed. And in fact, I don't know if you want to make this part of this motion or make it a separate motion. I would also ask that the board vote to authorize me to file all the documents that need to go with this proposed rule so that it can be received at DAR. The rules that the documents we will be sending tonight, if this is approved, are the text of the rule, the finding of necessity, a notice of emergency adoption form, and a certification that will be signed by the Secretary of State. There are additional documents that I'm permitted to file later on. They're a regulatory impact statement, that type of thing, that with your permission, the board's permission, I will work on and get those filed after today.
Okay, let me see if I get it right. Tony, so help me. I'll amend my motion to adopt the proposed emergency regulation and to authorize council to file all required documents to make the adopted regulation effective.
Perfect, thank you.
If that works, Tony?
That works perfectly.
Okay. I'll entertain a vote to adopt. I vote yay.
This is Jill. I vote
I
yay.
vote yay. This is Tom. I vote yay.
Okay. The board approves the adoption of the emergency regulation and authorization of council to file documents as per requirements. Is there any other business before the board? Any other comments or questions? I'll entertain any other public comment at this time if people would like to say something. Oh, I hear none, and this has been not an easy time. I want to thank all of those who have worked with us, Department of Health, NISAC, individual funeral directors, and crematories in trying to address the issues that we faced with this this COVID-19 crisis and the resulting tragic death. So I'm hopeful that this makes a difference, and I want to thank you all. I'll make a motion to adjourn. A second?
I will second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you all very much. Just nobody else. Have a good weekend, huh? Not the weekends matter anymore. Thank you all.
Thank you.